Christmas is a time that's filled with magic. Flying reindeer, Santa Claus visiting the world's children in just one night, wishes coming true. But the most magical Christmas ever was the very first one, which happened a long, long time ago. Around 2,000 years ago, in fact. Settle down and listen as I tell you the story of that first Christmas and why it was so magical. Our story begins in a town called Nazareth, thousands of miles away from here. A young woman called Mary lived there, and so did a carpenter named Joseph. They loved each other very much and were soon to be married and live together. Then one day, while Mary was at home on her own, she was visited by someone she hadn't met before. And it was someone who wasn't like anyone she had met before either. They had fair, golden hair, bright white and golden robes, and they shone like a star. The light was so bright that at first Mary could hardly see her visitor. The mysterious stranger introduced themselves. It was the Archangel Gabriel, God's own messenger, and they had a very special message for Mary. The Archangel told her that she was going to have a baby. Now, this would have been a big enough surprise for Mary. She was not yet married to Joseph, and she was not expecting to have a child so soon. But then the Archangel Gabriel told her that the baby would be God's son, and that God had decided his name would be Jesus. Understandably, Mary was shocked and scared. She told Joseph, who was also shocked and a bit confused about what to do. He wasn't sure whether to believe Mary at first. They weren't married and didn't live together, and he was also worried about what people would say if they found out. That night, however, Joseph had a dream where an angel visited him too. The angel told him that everything Mary had said was true, and that he should trust her and marry her just as they had planned. So, in the coming days, Joseph did exactly what the angel had said to do and married Mary. Now, although they both lived in Nazareth, Joseph was not from that town. He was from a town called Bethlehem, and at the time when all of this was taking place, the Roman Emperor Augustus had instructed everyone to return to their original homes so they could be registered for some very grown-up thing called tax purposes. This meant that both he and Mary would need to travel miles and miles by donkey across the desert. By the time they set off, Mary was very pregnant indeed, and her baby would be born very, very soon. So it was a hard, uncomfortable journey for her that took 5 whole days, more or less without any stopping at all. By the time they got to Bethlehem, Mary, Joseph, and not forgetting that poor donkey, were all very tired. They desperately needed somewhere to stay, so Joseph began knocking on the doors of every inn that they passed. But everywhere was full. Lots of other people had received the emperor's message and had arrived in Bethlehem at the very same time. Mary and Joseph were very worried now, as they needed somewhere safe and warm where Mary could have her baby. Joseph had nearly ran out of doors to knock on, when suddenly their luck changed. Well, sort of. The final inn they came to was also full, but the innkeeper was a kind man, and when he saw that Mary was very pregnant indeed, he said that they could both stay in the stable, as long as they didn't mind sharing with some farm animals. Well, with no other choice, Mary and Joseph made their beds inside the stable, using hay and some sheets that the innkeeper had spare. Although it wasn't what they'd hoped for, sharing the stable with a number of sheep, an ox and a donkey meant that it was a lot warmer inside than they had feared. They had found somewhere just in time too, as Mary soon began to give birth to her baby. That night, as Mary gave birth to her beautiful baby, Jesus, a big, bright new star appeared in the sky above them. It seemed to appear precisely the same time as baby Jesus had arrived in the world. The star was so bright, it startled 3 nearby shepherds who were busy at that moment tending to their flocks of sheep. Suddenly, a voice spoke to them from the sky. The voice of an angel. The voice told them not to be afraid, and that the bright light they saw had appeared because a special baby, who would be their saviour, had been born in a stable in Bethlehem. The shepherds could hardly believe what had just happened, or what they had heard, but they had all heard it, and they decided to follow the star to Bethlehem to find a saviour that the angel spoke of. When the 3 shepherds eventually arrived at the stable and saw the baby Jesus, they knew in their hearts that everything that the angel had said was true. And without any discussion between them, they all knelt down at the same time to worship this baby Jesus, who, by that point, was swaddled in bits of cloth and was resting in a manger on a bed of hay. At the same time, far away in the east, 3 wise men also saw the star that the 3 shepherds had. These men knew a lot about stars from studying them, and they knew that this was a sign that a great new ruler and saviour had been born. However, these men were not visited by an angel like the shepherds, and they originally thought that the special newborn baby would be found in Jerusalem, in King Herod's palace. This was not the case, however, and when the wise men informed King Herod of the new star and what it meant, the king became very angry and worried that this new ruler would take away his throne. He told the wise men that according to prophecy, a saviour was meant to be born in Bethlehem, and so he instructed them to find this newborn king and report back to him about where he could be found. He told them that he wanted to worship him himself. This was a lie, though, as what King Herod really wanted to do was to kill the baby Jesus, so he could never ever take his place as ruler. The wise men set off and eventually found the stable after travelling for many days and nights. Like the shepherds that had arrived before them, they too knelt and worshipped the baby Jesus. They also brought him some very fancy expensive gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They too also knew in their hearts, just like the shepherds had, that everything they had believed since seeing the star that night was true. This child was indeed the ruler and saviour they had searched for, and they couldn't wait to tell everyone they knew about him, starting with King Herod. Thankfully, an angel appeared to them all that first night while they slept and told them of King Herod's terrible plans. When each of the men woke to tell the others of the dream they had had, they realised that they had all experienced the same dream, and that this surely meant that it had to be true. They all agreed that they would ignore what King Herod had asked them to do, risking their lives in the process, and instead just return home, keeping Jesus' location a secret. Soon after that, Joseph was visited again by an angel who told him of King Herod's jealousy and anger, and warned Joseph that Herod had suspected he would be able to find baby Jesus in Bethlehem. Desperate to protect their new baby, Mary and Joseph packed up and set off once again, this time for Egypt, where they would be safe. It would be some years later, once King Herod had died, and when Jesus was a young boy, that he, his mother Mary, and Joseph would eventually be able to return to Nazareth. And it would be some years then until Jesus would become the young man that more and more people began to recognise as their saviour. But that, as they say, is another story.